Today's video is brought to you by the letter R. This is Sega Masters. At long last, we finally reached the last Western release of 1988. The Master System's most critical year in its US run has been an up and down roller coaster to say the least, and we fortunately get to close it on a mostly strong note with R-Type, a port of Irem's classic arcade shoot 'em up that comes to Sega's console courtesy of Compile, though they're not credited. Once again, an evil alien force is making trouble for the people of Earth, in this case the Bydo Empire and its army of cyber-organic creatures. Of course, it's up to you to save the day by taking the controls of your R-9 Starfighter to turn back the hostile marauders through 8 stages of shooting action. The mid-1980s was something of a renaissance period for the horizontally scrolling shoot-em-ups, and leading the way was Konami's arcade classic Gradius, known in some parts of the world as Nemesis. This title all but wrote the book on the genre, from the various themed levels to the customizable special weapon system, and was successful enough to spawn a number of sequels and follow-ups, as well as various imitators. In 1987, Irem mounted a strong case for the shoot-em-up throne with R-Type championing their cause. Similar in gameplay to Gradius, R-Type added its own twists on the formula that we'll delve deeper into, and its high-resolution visuals, stylish levels, and challenging yet addictive gameplay made it a hit in the gaming halls. It too would birth a long-running franchise. A home port was seemingly destined to happen, and some computer versions were released, while the first console conversion appeared in a way no one quite expected. Many gamers probably don't remember that R-Type was actually distributed in American arcades by Nintendo, and since Irem was a third-party publisher for the company, you'd think an NES or Famicom port would be all but guaranteed. But oddly enough, a conversion never appeared on the NES, which is somewhat head-scratching since Nintendo was usually able to easily snag the hot licenses for their top-selling 8-bit console. In fact, no home version of R-Type would make its way to any Nintendo system until 1991, on the Game Boy. Instead, Sega was somehow able to secure R-Type as an exclusive for the Master System, one of the very rare times they managed to grab a top license away from their main competitor. And it gave them the opportunity to provide their fanbase with some of the space shooting action that NES gamers have been able to enjoy for the longest time on their consoles through home versions of Gradius and a few of its sequels, most notably Life Force, one of the more beloved shoot-em-ups in the Nintendo library, which incidentally was also released in North America around this time. So it's not like Nintendoites actually missed R-Type, as they had plenty of other titles to satisfy that itch. Compile, one of Sega's biggest supporters during this period, was then given the task of bringing R-Type to the Master System, and they knew it would be a tall order due to the console's technical limitations, even with the extra space a 4 mega cartridge affords. To their credit, they made the most of what they had to work with to craft a reasonably faithful translation of the arcade game, albeit one that hasn't aged very well. R-Type starts out much like any other Gradius-style shooter as you blast the scores of foes soaring your way with the R9's wave cannon, which can fire normal shots or be charged up for super blasts. Things change once you're introduced to the game's main gimmick, the indestructible force pod you obtain from drones to serve as your main ally. This rather versatile droid can fly independently to add some extra offense, or be attached to the R9 at any time, either to the front to act as a shield or to the rear to cover your 6. You can also detach it by launching it as a battering ram to take out anything standing in front of you, or behind you. But even with the force pod backing you up, you'll still need to amass all the firepower you can collect if you hope to stand against the Bydo hordes, which come at you relentlessly from every direction. Fortunately, the drones also drop colored gems, and collecting them activates one of the R9's 3 special weapons, each of which have their own strengths and weaknesses, but all of them can be quite helpful depending on where you are in the game. Other available armaments include a homing missile as well as 2 small satellites that fly by your side, and the more gems you collect, the more powerful the force pod becomes as well. Toward the end of the level, the scenery fades out to a plain black background, and most other titles on the console use this to warn you of an upcoming face-to-face confrontation with the level boss. That is indeed the case, as a monstrous creature is waiting to prevent you from advancing to the next stage, and of course you need to slay these behemoths by finding and attacking their weak spot, usually with the help of the Force Pod. Successfully dispatch the beast, and you're given a moment to bask in your accomplishment while your bonus points are tallied, the only time you actually get to see your score and remaining lives. Then you're immediately thrown into the next stage to continue your battle against the Bydos. Admittedly, R-Type did lose quite a bit of flair during its transition to the Master System, especially with the visuals, which are a noticeable downgrade from the arcade version's eye-popping graphics due to the console's slightly limited color palette. Nonetheless, whether it's a flight through a cold metallic fortress or an eerie organic cavern, each of the coin-up stylish levels are mostly well preserved in this port and still cool to look at with their different themes and detailed backgrounds. The somewhat shrunken down sprites do resemble their coin-up counterparts with some good animation to boot, and while the bosses also suffered slightly, their great grotesque design still managed to shine in this port. Audio-wise, the Master System sound chip obviously can't mimic the coin-up's background music with 100% accuracy, yet each of the stage themes still mesh well with their corresponding environments and are fun to listen to. Though once again, the FM-enhanced soundtrack of the Japanese version gets the slight edge over its Western counterpart, as the PSG tunes can sound a bit tinny and piercy in spots. The sound effects are serviceable but nothing special, and there are moments they seem to overwhelm the music. As far as the gameplay itself goes, the unique action that made R-Type such a favorite among shooter fans is present and accounted for in this port, right down to the various challenges that keep each level fresh, such as this iconic battle against a giant warship that has since been duplicated in countless other shooters. However, this cart also emulates the coin-up's notoriously punishing difficulty level, though it's mainly due to the altered emphasis in gameplay. Unlike similar shooters, just mindlessly blasting everything that comes your way won't get you very far in this cart. A fair amount of strategy and memorization is required to survive in each of the 8 levels, such as deciding the best way to utilize the Force Pod in different situations, and which special weapon to equip the R-9 with at certain points. The controls are responsive for the most part, though the R-9 can feel a little sluggish at times, which can be an issue when you're dodging everything coming your way. It doesn't help that Compile might have tried a little too hard to include as much as they could from the coin-up, as the console often gets pushed to its limits trying to manage all the sprites and projectiles moving around the screen. As a result, slowdown and flicker frequently pop up when the action gets hot and heavy, which can drag the game down to a crawl and make certain objects hard to see. It's not necessarily a game breaker and can be overcome, though it's rather annoying to deal with. On top of that, your ship perishes from one hit. With all the blinking enemies and bullets, you can often find yourself losing a life without even knowing how you died. Fortunately, each stage has a few restart points, so you usually don't have to make up too much ground. Granted, your next life starts without any of your enhancements, but a drone usually isn't too far away to reclaim your Force Pod and extra armaments. And granted, the whole trial and error setup can lead to more than a few frustrating moments, yet the addictive gameplay keeps you engaged enough to want to try the level again while learning from your mistakes for your follow-up attempt. Much like the levels themselves, the boss fights also require a bit of planning and perseverance to succeed. Defeating each of the monsters can seem like a daunting task at first, but once you figure out their attack patterns, you'll be able to strike at their weak spots with little trouble. If anything, the home cart's slightly slower pace makes this conversion a touch easier than its arcade parent. It's game over once your lives are exhausted, and you'll be grateful for the cheats that grant you many more credits than the initial 3 you start off with. There may even be an invincibility code to help you out as well. Ultimately, Sega's R-Type does its job in bringing the arcade game to the Master System mostly intact, with very few omissions. The graphics and audio are a reasonable facsimile of its coin-op parent, and it plays well for what it is despite some sticking points. It would have been perfectly sufficient for disciples of the coin-op back in 1988, but sadly it falls victim to how time hasn't been kind to it. Nowadays, fans just looking to enjoy R-Type on their television screens don't have to grin and bear all the chugging and blinking of this conversion like they had to when this was the only home version. In fact, Sega's cart would be rendered obsolete just a year later by another competing platform, the TurboGrafx 16. which launched in the US in the fall of 1989 with its own port of R-Type among the first wave of releases. NEC's console didn't have all the restrictions of the Master System holding it back, and thus they were able to churn out a near-perfect port that puts Sega's flawed translation to shame. It was even among the initial titles Nintendo offered when the Wii Virtual Console was originally launched in the fall of 2006. Not to mention the other versions of R-Type that have appeared on the PlayStation and even recently on the Xbox 360. Consoles more than capable of presenting R-Type without any technical hiccups bringing them down. But at least Sega's port can boast about one unique feature not found in any other version of R-Type. Compile managed to slip in this exclusive secret level that can be accessed through a special warp point in the 4th stage. Granted, the stage itself isn't particularly impressive, but it is a nice little bonus for Master System gamers and does culminate in a fight with a cool looking boss. So the final verdict on R-Type depends on what exactly you're looking for. It's a solid port of the arcade game, but far from the best version currently available, and while fans might be satisfied with this conversion job, they'll be hard-pressed to choose it over the more technically competent ports out there that can be obtained just as easily as this card. But if you're just looking for a good, horizontal shooter for the Master System that rivals the classics found on the NES, then R-Type more than succeeds in filling that need with its unique presentation and addictive action that keeps you coming back for more punishment, despite often pushing the console and your blood pressure to their limits. It may not hold up like it used to, but R-Type is still worth checking out for Sega gamers hungry for shoot-'em-up action. And on that note, we finally closed the book on 1988. But once you reach the summit, there's only one way to go, and 1989 would prove to be something of a downward slope for Sega's 8-bit console, which was already beginning to face a somewhat uncertain future. The Master System would continue to be supported by Sega and Tonka in North America and Europe for much of the year, but over in Japan, Sega decided to cut their losses with their 8-bit platform, feeling a new console was needed to lead their cause against Nintendo's worldwide dominance, one they would eventually bring to the US by the end of 1989. What this new console would ultimately mean for the Master System outside of Japan remained to be seen, but we'll see how it plays out as we begin our tour of 1989 starting next episode.